So I've often talked about how the scale of Naruto villains became a huge mess. Kaguya comes out of nowhere and basically takes over the whole plot, but how did we get there? How did all this happen? How did what was once a simple story of a boy trying to prove himself worthy of being Hokage become such a huge mess? Well, let's start at the beginning. Our first major villains are Zabuza and Haku. Well, Gato is the real villain, but Zabuza and Haku are the most active. Basically, Kakashi says at the beginning to Team 7 that while they may go out and do cool things, at the end of the day, people die. No sugarcoating there. The overlaying theme of the Naruto story was that the shinobi system was wrong. Countless people say the life of a ninja is too cruel. Zabuza and Haku represent those affected by the cruelty of the shinobi world. But that no matter how much they repress their emotions, but in the end, you can't bury them, and you can't be rid of your human emotions, and they both find redemption in death. Well, Gato gets what he deserves. The purpose is to show Naruto what it means to be a ninja, and thus he decides to be a ninja his own way. The next arc essentially has Naruto meet his evil counterpart, Gaara. Gaara is basically a bloodthirsty monster who just loves to kill people. But we also get a hint of an even darker villain, Orochimaru. A villain who's so scary that Team 7 nearly dies against him. Orochimaru is the greater scope villain, while Naruto's main antagonist is Gaara. We see Gaara as essentially what Naruto would be like if he didn't have a Ruka in his life. In fact, his Ruka equivalent turns out to have actually hated him, until Kishimoto retconned it, but that's another story. Orochimaru causes the death of the third Hokage, but his purpose is to tempt Sasuke to the dark side, as it were. You will seek me out, as he says. Gaara is dealt with, and Naruto is able to turn him due to his shared feelings of loneliness. Neji also serves as a secondary antagonist, and we find out why he is so bitter. He is basically treated like a slave by his clan, expected to do no more than sacrifice himself for the main clan since he's of the inferior side clan. Naruto promises Neji that he will change the Yuga when he becomes Hokage. The next arc sees Orochimaru again act as the primary villain, but we meet Itachi and Kasame, who are part of a more sinister organization. Itachi once again serves the purpose of rekindling Sasuke's desire for vengeance. While Naruto is meeting and making connections with those like Jiraiya, Sasuke is becoming more and more motivated by darkness. Let's talk about Sasuke real quick. Kishimoto admitted that he started developing the story without Sasuke, but the story was stalling. On a suggestion from his editor, he was told to create a rival, and once that was done, Kishimoto figured out how to plot the story. Naruto and Sasuke are basically two sides of a coin. Very different from each other, but also very similar. Naruto never had a family. Sasuke's was murdered. Naruto is extroverted. Sasuke is introverted. Naruto is shunned by the kids. Sasuke is popular. Both are involved in a love triangle with Sakura. While both Naruto and Sasuke act like they hate each other, they are perhaps the only ones who truly understand each other. In the Sasuke retrieval arc, Sasuke deflects to Orochimaru for means of gaining power. Orochimaru and Itachi basically serve the purpose of fueling Sasuke's desire for vengeance and power. Orochimaru doesn't like the idea of passing things on to the next generation. He seeks immortality as a way to defy nature. He wants Sasuke for his young body, which Sasuke doesn't really care about. Before Sasuke and Naruto part ways, Kishimoto really lays on that Naruto is light, Sasuke is dark. It was always there. It's just as time went on, Kishimoto got more blatant about it. Naruto is bathed in light while Sasuke is walking into literal darkness. It's also here that we get the first keys of Madara, as this is the place where the first Hokage and Madara fought. Part 1 had a clear progression of the villains. Zabuza and Haku are our starter villains, who basically serve the purpose of telling us the flaws of the shinobi system. Neji and Gaara are also victims of the system. Gaara being thought of as nothing more than a tool because of the monster inside him, and Neji is cast aside as an outcast, just a slave designed to fulfill his duty. Orochimaru fills the role of pure evil in that he has no redeeming qualities. Itachi is mentioned to have murdered the entire Uchiha clan for reasons we don't know. But the flashback with Sasuke before the fight at the Valley at the end does hint that there's more to this than it appears, particularly that the Uchihas are shunned by the rest of the village. All this serves to hint that the shinobi system is wrong and it needs to be fixed. So what will Naruto do about it? In part 2, we get to see the Akatsuki organization in action, and we see flashes of their leader who is hidden in shadows, thus adding a sense of mystique to him. At the end of the Rescue Gaara arc, we see this figure named Tobi join the group, which hints that Kishimoto, or at least Yahagi, always had in mind that there was more to Tobi than first appeared. Subsequently, we get a couple of arcs with various focusing on members of Akatsuki as the villains. Hidden Kakuzu are used to further Shikamaru's development. Orochimaru is sort of the wild card against Akatsuki, as is Sasuke. But now that it's time for Sasuke to branch out on his own, Orochimaru isn't needed anymore and is thus given an anticlimactic end. Jiraiya fights Pain and we see him in the flesh, a former student of Jiraiya who has turned to evil. Thus, after the fight with Itachi, Sasuke learns the truth. The Uchiha clan were going to rebel against Konoha, and Itachi killed them to put a stop to it. Sasuke takes this information and decides to kill everyone. Yeah, okay then. We also find out that Tobi is really Madara Uchiha, which was done because Pain was about to be defeated in the next arc, and Kishimoto needs someone to take over as the main villain. It's just this character is really the main villain. Pain challenges Naruto's viewpoint on what he will do about the smaller, more oppressed villages, and Naruto doesn't really have an answer. And at the end, Naruto still doesn't really have an answer, partly because it's too early at this point in the story for him to have one. So now Sasuke has gone full-blown psychopath. The character Danzo is meant to show a far more sinister side to Konoha, the inner corruption, if you will. But instead of doing that, Danzo is basically sacrificed to further Sasuke's fall to evil. In the next arc established Madara to be the one who unleashed the Nine-Tails Fox, and is thus the reason Naruto grew up an orphan, thus seemingly solidifying him as the main villain of the series. So Kishi decided to do a war. But one problem, he killed off most of his villains, so who are they going to fight? Enter Kabuto, a loose end he had probably forgotten to wrap up till now. So we got two main villains for the war arc with Sasuke as a wild card. Then the real Madara is revealed, which was hinted at, I admit. But now this begs the question as to who was the man behind the mask. And it turned out to be Obito, which seemed to be a good way of tying everything together. Yeah, that kid who was first teased all the way back in the beginning of the series was the main villain. It looked pretty genius. But then Obito and Madara play who is the big bad game with each other, with Madara ultimately ending up on top. So once again we pulled a your main villain is in another castle. But even that wasn't the end of it. Near the end of the series, Kaguya is revealed to be the main villain. From what I understand, Kaguya may have been created as a tie-in with the last, and also because she was clearly set up for Boruto villains. He needed to get rid of Madara, and he needed to set up what the conflict would be for Boruto, so basically this was killing two birds with one stone. In order to justify this, Black Zetsu would claim that he wrote on a stone everything for Madara to do, thus basically everything that has gone wrong with the Naruto universe wasn't the result of a corrupt system, but because Black Zetsu wrote some fanfiction to get his mother revived. Yeah, I think I pointed that out before. Then of course we get Naruto versus Sasuke, and Sasuke's plan is to become the village's enemy so they unite to defeat him. Yeah, sure, Sasuke. So basically, all in all, this is what happened with Naruto villains.
Why did you even rope me into this? Because he roped me into this. Well, him over there, he roped me into this. Well, he roped me into this. Well, what about me? He roped me into this. Well, that one over there roped me in.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly. Ultimately, what I would blame is Kishimoto's poor planning. He was just burnt out and was just trying to finish the series because he wanted to move on with his life. But it seems like he can't do that because Samurai 8 failed, so he's basically made Naruto/Boruto into the sci-fi series he's always wanted to do. Reading some behind-the-scenes interviews, Orochimaru wasn't even his idea. Yes, he was originally planning on having Shikamaru win the whole tournament, but his editors told him to create a villain named Orochimaru who would disrupt the tournament, which leads me to wonder who was going to tempt Sasuke to the dark side if there was no Orochimaru. He didn't really have much of a plan. He knew the endgame was Naruto versus Sasuke, he just didn't know how he was going to get there. Basically, he knew the beginning and knew the end with this, but he just didn't have a middle. So when you're doing a series that you know will be a long runner, what's the moral here? Have at least something of a plan. It really would help. It's just like the Star Wars sequel trilogy, isn't it?